Hello guys, my name is Lars Stender. I'm a fantasy writer from Denmark. I'm here tonight to read from you my book, Madigo and the Hounds, a fantasy novel. I'll be reading chapter 32 this time. And if you want to know more about my books and works I've been doing, so just look at the bottom of the screen. Madigo and the Hounds, chapter 32. Someone knocked on the door. "Not now!" Montero shouted and continued to scowl at Madigo. However, the person outside the door had no intention of leaving and knocked forcefully on the door once more, this time more adamantly. Montero silently cursed, and the shadows surrounding Madigo drew back to their normal positions, just like the temperature in the room was neutralized. "Stay there," growled Montero at Madigo, as he made a sweeping movement with his right arm. "Makar in," he said in Ferul. There was a sound of a click from the door's lock, and the door opened. To Madigo's great surprise, it was a beautiful sorceress, Sasira, who entered, bringing with her a fragrance of exotic flowers. She wore a black, sleeveless dress in gauzy material that ruffled about her slim figure like a cloud of animated darkness. Her hair was dressed with gold barrettes, and large dangling crystal earrings gleamed like icicles from her earlobes. Her arms were wrapped in several bracelets made of gold and silver, and her fingers were decorated with numerous valuable rings. Nevertheless, Madigo noticed that her face looked tired and that there were red rings around her eyes. When she saw him, her eyes lingered on his face for a moment, and a strange softness hovered on her lips. "I'm sorry, Montero, but we have to talk," she insisted with a low voice, and finally turned her gaze to Montero. "It's about Madigo here." Montero couldn't help showing a certain amount of surprise. "Madigo?" he grunted, and his eyes narrowed into two narrow grey-blue slits. Sasira took a deep breath that indicated she was well aware that her next words would not be well received. "Madigo saved Sharimet from an utuku last night. It had already managed to mark her. Without him." Her voice faded, and Madigo saw her swallow something. "Sharimet? Your daughter?" Montero exclaimed incredulously. Sasira nodded slowly. Madigo bit his lip. "So, the girl's name is Sharimet," he thought, "and she is Sasira's daughter. Very interesting." His thoughts returned briefly back to that night and the moment where he lay on top of Sharimet in order to shield her with his body. He could still recall the smell of her warm blood and her fear, but he could still also feel the curves of her soft body. "An utuku," Montero repeated. "Are you sure?" Once again, Sasira nodded slowly and gravely. Montero turned around and mumbled a powerful curse. "What's an utuku?" Madigo heard himself asking before he knew it. Sasira turned towards him and said, "An utuku is a demon from my homeland. A very powerful and cunning demon. Utukus often act as messengers between humans and demon rulers. They move fairly freely between our world and their own, and they are virtually impossible to control." "Fairly freely, you say?" Sasira sighed. "The longer they stay in our world, the weaker they become, but they can rebuild their strength by sucking out the life of a human. They choose their victim by marking them, usually by biting or scratching them on the chest. When that happens, the victim's days are numbered." Sasira's voice faded, and the tears came to her eyes. She sat down. "And all because of your irresponsible behavior," roared Montero furiously as he looked at Madigo. Sasira lifted her head and her eyes flashed like lightning as she confronted Montero. "Utuku came from your crypt. You promised me that you wouldn't imprison one in that way. I warned you. You're just as much to blame for all this as Madigo. But at least he's given me a little extra time with my daughter," she added hoarsely, and went over to Madigo and squeezed his shoulder. "We'll talk soon, you and I," she said before turning on her heels and making her exit through the door. For a long time, Mortero merely glared at Madigo. Then he lifted his finger accusingly. Since you've apparently managed to save Cecila's daughter, you'll be spared the harshest punishment for your crime. This time. But don't think that the same goes for your friends. They're going to have to pay a price for your stupidity. That may teach you to think twice before disobeying my rules again. And from now on, I will personally be in charge of your lessons. And since you seem to take such pleasure in hanging out with the riffraff, your day will look something like this. From morning to noon you will have lessons here in my library, and in afternoons you will help the Dracoids expand the fortifications at Bloodstone, and form new barricades in the outer courtyard and down by the river valley. With those words, Mortero marched through the door. Cursed angel sod! Madigo heard him mumble as the sound of his steps from his heavy boots echoed through the corridor. End of chapter 22.
Oh yeah, and here we go a little bit chit-chat.
Yeah.
So again, we get all of this lovely story.
Yep.
Now we got a new name.
Yes.
And if I recall right, she was also his sister.
Not this one.
Okay, so that's another one.
The sister's name is Helen.
Yeah.
She's another of the wizard students.
So where did this story? Oh, that was outside.
That was outside. When Madigo and his friends broke into the crypt of Bloodstone, they released these demons.
Yeah.
And they wreaked havoc in the courtyard of the fortress.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and that was when he met this girl Sharamet and saved her from these Utuku.
Mm-hmm. So now that is on place for me. Also, we haven't heard about this mom before.
No, not really.
So she must be some kind of strong wizard, since he can go into him without a bigger problem.
We are briefly told about her in one of the early chapters. She's one of the 4 most powerful wizards at the castle, and she teaches the students in various forms of magic.
Okay. So with that, let's close this chapter and stop the recording.
Yes.